And today we're going to talk about what it means when you're receiving feedback that you're not expecting. Now, I've been in engineering for the last 20 years. I have had numerous accolades. I have progressed very early in my career. I've been very fortunate where I've been on high-profile assignments. I have been on proposals that have landed million-dollar contracts where I was able to bring into the company. However, I remember early in my career where during performance reviews, I remember walking and my heart would always beat very fast. I remember coming into my manager's office and I remember feeling like a chilly 50 degrees. And as I walked to sit down at the table and his brows frowning slightly, I realized very quickly that it was not a chilly 50 because of the temperature. It was because of the conversation we were about to have. The great news is that performance reviews have changed so much since then. They have changed where you're now having more engaging conversations with your manager. They're changing where now you're having check-ins. They're changing where now you're having more one-on-one sessions, which is great. Because the last thing we want is when we have biannual reviews or end of the year reviews, you are surprised. And that should not be the case now. So now when you go into a review, you know exactly what your manager is going to talk about. So just a show of hands, how many people have been in a performance review? Okay. How many people have not? All right, that's good. So just so that we're on the same page, a performance review is a formalized process where you sit down with your leader and you assess your strengths and weakness. And it's also a way for you to determine your goals of what it's going to take for you to elevate your career. So let's say, for example, you're sitting down, you're receiving a performance review, and you're being told you're not technical enough. Now I want to tell everyone, don't panic. Okay, that's the last thing we want to do, is don't panic. And here's why. Because today, the goal is for me to give you the tools and strategies of what it takes to have an engaging conversation with your leader to ensure that at the end of that, you understand what you need to do to move forward. First thing, guide the conversation. Now this is where our emotional intelligence has to come into play. Because when someone is telling you something that you may not want to hear, the first thing you will probably be is defensive. So out of the 5 parts of emotional intelligence, we need to make sure the first thing we are is self-aware. And what that essentially means is that when you're having a conversation with your manager, understand your current emotional state and be aware of that. The second thing, self-regulation. Think before you speak, right? Because we want to make sure, because more than likely your manager is probably uncomfortable giving you feedback. So we want to make sure that, please write this down. First thing, self-awareness, understand your emotional state. And the second thing is self-regulation. Think before you speak. And as I said, you want to guide the conversation. And here's the thing, one thing we don't do is when we are having this feedback, you want to make sure that both you guys are on the same page. The first thing is establish the role that you have on the task you're working on. A lot of times we get work and we're just working, but you really don't know the role that you play. So if you're receiving feedback and your manager has a comment from what he saw or she saw or the feedback they received, the first thing you can say is, on this task that I'm working on, I was a system analyst. Boom, we've already established the role that you're playing. The second thing, focus on impact rather than outcome. So, I'm a system analyst. My job is to run simulations to determine the performance of the system that I have in order to provide it to our sponsor so they can determine what type of capabilities they want to add. We've established the role, we've established the technical work you're doing, and we've now established the end outcome of that, the impact of what you're doing. So we want to make sure we have that conversation with your manager. Second thing, ask specific questions. Now, I have interviewed about 10 people that have received feedback like this, and I always ask them, do you ask specifics? And they say no. And we want to make sure that you're getting quantitative data versus qualitative. right? Quantitative is data that is measurable. Because if someone is saying, hey, you're not technical enough, and you're like, well, can you tell me where I did not contribute a high level technical contribution? And if they say, well, you didn't really turn this in on time, turn what in on time? So you want to make sure that they're saying, Uche, the information, the technical work that you did was not accurate, or the simulations you ran had the incorrect numbers, and we gave you that. But you never want it to be qualitative, because qualitative is not measurable. And a lot of times, everyone, is usually qualitative and not quantitative. But the goal here is not to have a back and forth with your manager. The goal is not to determine who's right or wrong. The goal is to make sure that you guys are in alignment and they become an advocate. Because the majority of the time, it's a lack of communication that's happening here. So make sure you ask specific questions when they're giving you that type of information. Third thing, is this perception or performance? Here's the reason. If it is a performance gap, that is technical competency, we can give you training on that. We can make sure that it's in alignment with the role that you have. We can make sure that maybe you didn't have the right skill set, it's not the right job. But if it is a perceived performance, now that means that needs to be an improvement in communication. Because someone has made a decision based on lack of communication with you that you're not technical enough. And we need to be able to mitigate both, but more importantly, be able to determine which one it is. Because that establishes how you maneuver and move forward when you're having a conversation with your manager. Step 4, develop a plan of attack, ladies and gentlemen. Review on what you have heard and develop a plan of execution. I always tell myself this when I hear feedback: be quick, be slow to respond, and quick to reflect. Because I want to make sure that I've understood what I've heard, and I want to make sure that I've developed a plan of execution for improvement. You review your workload with your manager. This is such a great opportunity for you and your manager to have a great relationship and establish if you didn't have one. It's such a great way for you to have an advocate and a sponsor in your manager. Because when you work on that 30, 60, and 90-day evaluation plan, and let's say you are delivering on time and your manager's aware of everything you're doing, and your task lead comes in and have a conversation with your manager and say, hey, Uche's not delivering this on time. Now your manager's like, wait a minute, I've seen all the emails, I've seen the great work she's doing. So I think maybe this isn't about a technical competency. I think this is more about communication. You want someone fighting for you when you're not in those rooms. So make sure you have a 30, 60, and 90-day evaluation. 15, make a commitment and follow up. I've seen this numerous of times where we will solve the immediate problem and then that's it. But we still have to take ownership of our own career, and we want to make sure that we make a commitment and follow up. And make sure you're consistent with the 90-day evaluation with your manager. I cannot stress that enough. Make sure that you follow up. I go see my manager maybe once or twice, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. Not because I need to, but really just because I like the guy. He's great. But we have a great relationship. And at any point, if I'm having any issues, I can just go talk to him about 5 minutes, and he's aware. And you want to make sure you tag up with your task lead on a weekly or daily basis. If you're really working on a project and you have a task lead who is giving you tasking, you really should be following up with them anyway and tagging them, just to make sure, because with the ever-evolving and the changing of technology and you just never know new information is coming in, you really need to make sure that you're in alignment with where the team is going, because you never know, something might have changed and you're just not aware of it. But more importantly, you want to make sure that you're on the right course. And if you need to course correct, you have someone there. Now, make sure that during the 30, 60, and 90-day evaluation, that this is what you're really being assessed on. Technical competency, we talked about this. Communication, and your leadership. You'll be surprised if you can demonstrate all 3 of these, what really comes out of a 90-day assessment. I've seen people get promoted. I've seen people get on different tasking, high-profile tasking, because they were able to demonstrate this. But more importantly, they showed that they could communicate, and they started having a great relationship with their manager, who became an advocate for them. Step 6, be consistently consistent. Continue to have engaging conversations even after the 90-day review. Make sure that is a part of your habit. You know, they say if you do something habitually, it becomes permanent. This is what we want. You want to make sure that you're consistent with how you're engaging with your leadership team. I cannot stress that enough. Early in my career, I didn't do that. That's just because I didn't know to do that. But I learned very quickly. Be consistently consistent in communicating and performance. And step 5, remember the steps. Step 1, make sure you guide the conversation. 2, ask specific questions. Don't be afraid, because if someone is providing feedback on you, you have a right to get the detailed information from them. 3, is it perception or is it performance? We can mitigate that. If it's perception, we just need to improve our communication. If it is performance, we know that we can get training and put you in the right job. Develop that plan of attack, make a commitment and follow up, and be consistently consistent, but above all, remember